Okay, welcome back to the first ever Presidential Candidate Forum on Entrepreneurship. We've had 2 candidates so far, and we are very pleased to welcome the third. We're welcoming Mr. Perry Johnson. Mr. Johnson is an entrepreneur who's founded 80 companies worldwide. In 1983, he founded Perry Johnson, Inc., which did work on organizational quality management standards, including one of the top industrial standards, ISO 9000, since their very beginning. When General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford all raised their quality standards derived around ISO 9000, Mr. Johnson's firm was one of the first firms to supply the required certifications. So he's been involved in business and production issues for many years. His entrepreneurial initiatives expanded from there with a continued focus on compliance with industry standards. He's the author of nonfiction books, including textbooks, and he's a graduate of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Perry Johnson. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Fantastic.
Yeah. We know it's a busy time on the campaign trail, so we appreciate you making it here.
This is my book, by the way.
This is your book,
Yes.
and the book is?
2 cents to save America.
2 cents to save America. It's that cheap to save America.
It's that simple in
that
concept.
simple.
Yes, it is.
So let's start with your entrepreneurial experience, which goes back for quite a while now. You've founded so many companies, and so you've learned you've had a lot of entrepreneurial experiences along the way. You've met a lot of other entrepreneurs along the way. What are the things that get in the way of entrepreneurs the most, and how would you as president help remove some of those barriers?
Well, it starts with believing in yourself. And when you have an idea, you have to run with it. I think that what happens is very similar to what happens in a person's life. You just go through a lot of experiences in life, and you have to be able to get through it. You know, I'm running for president right now, which many of you know, and it's almost like running a company in a funny sort of way. It was only about a month ago that I said to myself, geez, we have a poll here that we just took, and I'm just over 1% in Iowa, and I'm spending all my time in Iowa. How am I going to get to 1% nationally? And I'm thinking, man, I have no chance. But then we had an idea, and with that idea, we suddenly flourished. And right now, today, notice in the last 3 days, we had 3 national polls. I was over 1% in all of them, and of all the candidates here, I'm the highest among the Republicans and independents of anybody here today. And I will be on that debate stage. But in business, what happens is you have so many things that go on and so many things that go wrong. I'm going to start out with number 1, you have to watch the money. The most important thing in a business is to make sure that you do not drain yourself by spending money on things that are not relevant. You know, when I started in business, I had this crazy idea. I actually started with statistical process control. In fact, in the very beginning, my very first client was actually the Detroit Lions. And I would go to Monty Clark's home on Wednesday night. We would plan all the plays. We would go through all the strategy. And there was no money in it. But I got statistics into football before anybody was even thinking about it. I did the same thing in baseball. But there was, again, no money. But I knew in the manufacturing world, when I was with Borg Warner, that they had a way in which they were trying to get quality that just wasn't going to work, because they have inspectors at the end of a line. And all these guys would look at the product. If it wasn't any good, they would throw it out or rework it. And I said, well, heck, this is the wrong way to go, because it's so expensive to rework product that has already gone through all this labor cost, and you don't ameliorate. You don't get any better. And I thought I know how to solve the problem. Now, my background was mathematics, so I went in and I started in the beginning of the operation, and I ironed out variation. And the line personnel knew that operation inside out. What I did was to give them a tool. And they actually constructed the moving average charts. And I had this idea. Now, I want to tell you what's funny about this is that at the time, I could not even tell my mother about this business, because when I told her that I was going to leave Borg Warner, she said, that is the stupidest thing in the world. You have this great job you were lucky to get. Why would you do anything so idiotic? And then I'd have everybody and their brother telling me I'm not going to make it. And I've been having people tell me I'm not going to make it all my life.
So to that point around having a dream, having the determination to pull it off, there's some research that was done. 62% of Americans actually have an entrepreneurial dream. 41% of them would start it within 6 months if they could, but only 2% of them actually do. So there's this gap between America's entrepreneurial aspirations and what actually happens in practice. Why is that?
Go and do it. Live your dream.
So what's going on in America that's preventing that from happening?
I think people have to have a more optimistic attitude about what they can do. Do you know this country was founded on optimism? I want you to think about the beginning of this country. We had a handful of people that had a dream, that they could have a country unlike any country on earth, a country by the people, for the people. And to do that, they had to leave their country, come over here. Then you had people that were here that had to do the impossible. They had to fight the most powerful army in the history of the world, but they did it. Why? Because they believed in themselves. You don't think it was hard? George Washington, he kept those people up. It was the attitude, the optimism that allowed us to win that war. It's the optimism that made America what it is today. Do you know 1 out of every 6 people in this country become an entrepreneur? And do you know that we know in the beginning 80% of the businesses are going to fail within 5 years, but it doesn't stop us. And we work 15, 16 hours a day, and we love it. We're not making minimum wage. We're probably not making any money, but we do it. And why do we do it? Because we have a fire inside of us. And it is that fire that drives us. In fact, it's that fire that has made America the most amazing country in the history of the world.
Do you think we have a crisis of that optimism now, or do you think we're doing just fine?
No, I think that's the major problem. We have to get back to that optimism. That is what made this country what it is. And let's start thinking about it that way, that we can do it instead of reasons why we can't do it. And that is the difference. And that's the key to success of America. And I want you to think about anything that's done. Think about the football team. I love football. In fact, I think the Lions are going to win the Super Bowl this year. And I'm going to tell you something, that the attitude on that football team determines whether or not they win. You can almost see it. You go out there and you watch that team, and it's the fire inside that team that makes them win. Because everyone on that team is a great player. Because everybody has the same farm team, right? They pick the players, and they get to pick first if they're worst. But it is something inside them that determines whether or not they win. And that is the American spirit. And I think that's what we're losing.
Let me just pivot this back to entrepreneurship and your amazing professional career and how you would really translate that if you were elected president. What are 3 things you would take from what you've learned as someone who's run many businesses, and you would really apply that to the position of president?
Well, I think they got to start teaching that in colleges, don't you think? Don't you think we ought to invest some time and energy in teaching our kids in high school and college about the opportunities that await them? Think about what can be done. You know, I was campaigning for governor at one time. And of course, I didn't get the valid signatures on there because we had these fraudulent petitioners out there.
Yes.
I guess Dana Nessel is now prosecuting them because 5 guys were knocked off the ballot. I wouldn't be running for president now. I would have been governor of Michigan. But now,
actually, let's go back to that for a moment. And this is something that entrepreneurs would really appreciate and value. You had something where my understanding is that there were ballots signed by dead people, when you were running for that position. That's a quality control issue every entrepreneur is dealing with. How would you really address that if you were elected president, really keeping the quality control of the federal government strong, like you tried to deal with this in your own companies?
Well, the bottom line on that is that we have to have some standards, and we have to start by having a basic objective. Understand right now, the fundamental objective in which our government is run is nuts. Because you know, and I know, that they get a budget every year. And at the end of every year, they go out of their way to make sure that every penny is spent, right? Now, I say we do just the opposite. We start running it the way we run a business. And we freeze that budget, and they have to cut 2 cents out of every dollar of discretionary spending. That way, we reduce the budget every year instead of increasing it. And as we have inflation, and as we have increased our gross domestic product, we start balancing the budget, but more importantly, we get more money into the hands of the people. If we start shrinking the government and give more money to the people, they have more money to start businesses. They have more money to live. Think of how hard it is right now with inflation. There is no greater tax on the middle class than inflation.
So it sounds like for this specific audience, what you would do for entrepreneurs is you would really balance the budget, and if they have more money in their pockets, they'd have more money to then invest in their own businesses.
Well, we also have to have programs that encourage entrepreneurship, because if we don't do that, we're going to have difficulties. Now, I admit I did not borrow any money. I didn't have access to money. But what I did was actually go and decide to take a car and sell the car, essentially get a loan on the car, and I had to talk the banker into giving me a loan on the car. I think they lent me $4,500. That is how I started the business. And I did that merely by getting a loan on a car so that I could buy a car. That was it. I didn't have anything to work with.
So that's incredible. You started with basically a $4,500 car loan to what it is now more than 80 businesses.
Yes, actually, I started with virtually nothing. When I was in grad school, I was getting eviction notices because I couldn't pay my rent.
Yes, I read that.
You know, so
yeah.
You're talking to a guy that literally not only started with nothing, but is used to having to scrimp. That is part of the reason why I am relatively frugal. None of my companies have any debt. I've never had a company go bankrupt. I don't even have any personal debt.
So if you were elected president, how would you try to make the path either easier or less complicated for other entrepreneurs or businesses? What would happen to SBA? What would happen to other government agencies, like divisions of commerce that
The
that
government should
work
be
with them?
making money available to entrepreneurs that give them an opportunity to be able to succeed. Do you know how much that would improve businesses across this country? Instead of giving like $9 billion in Michigan to a very mega company so that they can bring in a Chinese company to build batteries in Michigan, that money should be allocated so that companies can start on the very low level. Give the entrepreneurs a chance, because the entrepreneurs are the future. And do you realize how much we grow if we have the young people starting their own businesses? Do we have any idea what this can do to America? We would ignite America. Not only that, we'd have a bunch of people that are happy. Instead of having people losing the excitement of America. Patriotism used to be one of the most important valued comment. In fact, do you realize that attitude has changed so exponentially? 20 years ago, 70% of the people thought patriotism was important. Now it's down to 39%.
So, but pivoting back to what you said for entrepreneurs, it sounds like you're talking about something that this audience would really like to hear, the fact that you would reallocate resources that are just given to large corporations and you would give them to smaller and mid-sized businesses.
Absolutely. In fact, let's stop catering to these large businesses. You know, when you're large, you should be able to get enough money to do whatever you want. In fact, think about the tax cut that we just had. The tax cuts were intended for the large businesses. The large businesses now are taxed at 20%. Everybody else is taxed at 37.6%. So when we had the tax cut, we didn't help the average guy or the little guy. Who did we help? We helped the big businesses. I say we stop that. We say instead, let's take a look at what we need to do for the little guy starting out. And let's face it, nothing is more important than inspiring our young people. The young people are the key to our future. And right now, I don't think they see the opportunity that they need to see. And we can give it to them.
Well, I want to run on this issue of K through 12 education, because entrepreneurial education, this poll we did at Right to Start last fall, this was actually one of our highest polling issues. We actually polled people on the question of should people graduate from from K through 12 education with the ability to start and grow their own business? And that was one of the highest polling issues. In fact, especially so from entrepreneurs of color in rural areas that often feel left out of the economic system. How do you do that, though? I mean, education reform is, a lot of people try to do education reform, but to add that entrepreneurial component where people learn the skills to start and grow their own businesses, it's not an easy task. How do you do that as president to actually reform education in that direction?
Actually, as you probably know, I actually think we ought to get rid of the Department of Education the way it is right now, because only about 8% of that money is going to grades K through 12. You realize we have a budget of $68 billion. We have 4,400 people that are employed there. And when you only get about 8% going to the young kids, I think it's absurd, absolutely nuts. What we really need to do is to give that money to the parents directly and let them they can go to whatever school they want. And if we have an opportunity to have a little more flexibility in what they teach in the schools, we can give them all our kids a better opportunity for life. They have to learn what makes sense. I'm going to tell you a story about a friend of mine by the name of Tom Leonard. He graduated with a degree in accounting, only he decided he was going to be a carpenter. Why? Because as a carpenter, he was making about 50% more money than he was as an accountant. 3 years later, he started a subcontracting firm, and then later he became a developer. When I'm talking about this, I'm talking about guys throughout history that have done this. Look at Bill Pulte. Bill Pulte decided he was going to build homes. Why would he do that? Smart guy. But he did pretty well. And now we have Pulte Homes. We have to keep in mind that if somebody wants to really have a business for themselves, they ought to be taught a little bit about how to go about it. So the basic fundamentals of starting a business aren't that difficult.
So they'd be learning that within the home if you cut something like the
No,
Department of
they'd be
Education?
learning that in school.
And so
because
schools should be doing
the
this.
school has to start teaching them.
School-
Let's have the schools teach kids something that is going to help them have a better life. When I was campaigning for governor, I was demanding that every single high school have trades taught in the school, because they should start at that point. And let's face it, you and I know that the opportunities in that business are rife. We have such an acute dearth of tradesmen. We can't even get them. We can't find them. And they're going to all make over $100,000 a year. And they'll do that almost overnight. You get a degree in philosophy and you try to get a job, you're lucky to get a job paying you $50,000 to $60,000 a year. But you get training in that, you suddenly have an opportunity to not only make over $100,000 a year, but start a business in 3 or 4 years.
So just to be clear, you would cut the Department of Education, but you would preserve like SBA and other programs that
You
nurture
have to
generate
have
business.
those. You should expand them. They should be tripled, because you have to have an opportunity to give support to the people that are going to do an awful lot for us. And these people aren't making a fortune, because when you start your business, you're putting in 15-hour days. You're lucky if you make any money.
It sounds like you believe the system is unfairly weighted towards large companies, and the little guy doesn't get the boost they need, and we should really be increasing that subsidization a lot.
Without a doubt. Actually, we lost the whole concept of what made America what it is today. And I think that has disillusioned a lot of the younger people. And I think that's something that we have to get back to. Because when you do a survey of young people, you'll see they don't have the same attitude that young people had 50 years ago. It's dramatically different, because they view the opportunities as not there. And I think it's something that we really have to address. And we do have so much to offer. And it is so much fun. You know, I will tell you, there is nothing more exciting than when you start a company and you go through so many negative things, and you have your ups and downs, and you have things that say, man, it's going to be tough, but you wake up the next day and you're ready to go again. And that is the spirit that we need, and we need to encourage that. But they need to have the basics, and if they have the basics, they have a much better chance.
Love your passion for this issue. I want to talk about the role of technology and technological change in entrepreneurs. There's so much talk these days of the disruptive influence of technologies, from artificial intelligence to blockchain to you name it. There's a lot of disruption happening. And so a question, how do you support and develop new technologies in a way that actually allows entrepreneurs to take advantage of them in the economy?
You know, this has been going on for years. I'm going to tell you a secret to a company. If you know that somebody needs something before they know they need it, go after it. If you have an idea, you run with it. They had the electric typewriter, and when that came out, they were able to eliminate about 50% of all the secretarial help. My dad worked at Lever Brothers Corporation, and he was in accounting. And it turns out that there were 67 people that were let go because a computer came in, and they said they're not going to be jobs for people anymore because the computer's going to take over. And yet right now, we can't even find workers. We will always find a way to adapt. But if you want to be successful, you have to see the future, get an idea, and run with that idea. And if you have that idea has to be along with what's happening in America and the rest of the world, because the world's going to constantly move forward. AI is going to change a lot. AI is actually amazing. You can have AI, give them something to talk about, and they'll write about it. You know, one of the companies that was started by my son was a mortgage company. He was 17 years old, and he had this entrepreneurship class. So he had started an e-commerce business when he was 16, when they had the COVID. And he was, I guess, rebuilding computers, and then he would sell them, and then he got this idea for this mortgage company. Well, it was illegal for him to start a mortgage company at 17 because he wasn't of age. So he came to me and he said, "Dad, I want this." I said, "Perry, this doesn't sound like such a good idea." Okay, but eventually we have a mortgage company, and now we're in 22 states. Now that started because he had an entrepreneurship class in his high school. And you have to keep in mind, that should be taught in every high school. And it teaches people to go out there, get an idea, and run with it. And sometimes it seems hard, but it'll work.
In your companies, it sounds like you've done some really innovative and interesting things on your with call centers. I think you've used prison workers in your call centers instead of taking them offshore.
Years ago I had call centers. That was, you're going back now into, God, I think that's maybe 22 years ago.
But you have
23 years ago.
As a global company, you've had direct experience with, finding employees and working with other governments to kind of cultivate and grow your businesses. How would that apply and speak to how you operated as president? And what would you say to entrepreneurs who rely heavily on China for their supply chain issues?
Well, I actually have an operation in China. China is probably one of the worst places in the world in which to do business.
And your direct experience working
there? Direct
there?
experience is a disaster, although I think we're doing okay now. But I'm going to tell you, when I first went in there, I had to have a Chinese citizen own 51% of the company. Then that was required by law. They steal all the technology. Then I finally got him out. It took me about 6 years to get him out. And then unceremoniously, the Chinese government came into my company, took all my computers for 90 days. They said they were looking for conflict of interest. They actually froze bank accounts. And they did this literally under just their own domain. They didn't go, you don't go to court, they just come in and they take it. And that's the way they operate there. So China, we have to recognize, is probably our biggest fear in terms of power, because in 1998, the gross domestic product was a little over $1 trillion. We were hovering around 8. So we were about 8 times the size of China, maybe 7.5 times. Now they are at 20 trillion, we're at 25 trillion. We're 25% bigger. And they have tremendous power. And now we are going to electric cars, and keep in mind that right now, although we may have possibilities for lithium in this one sea in California, we have only 3% of the supply of lithium. We don't even have the ability to make these electric batteries. China has over 50%, whereas right now we are the greatest supplier of petroleum and have the greatest reserves for petroleum. That is the opposite for lithium, which is required for these batteries. And we have to keep in mind that if we don't stay on top of AI in our defense system and what needs to be done there, we have a formidable foe, potential foe in China.
So where exactly have you had more productive and positive relationships abroad with, as an entrepreneur? If it's not China, where has it worked more effectively?
Everywhere else. Everywhere else. For example, all of Europe, obviously Japan, we're throughout Japan, Thailand, just about any place you can go. Canada, Mexico, South America, any place is better than China. China is very, very tough. And the Chinese government has total control. They can do whatever they want. And believe me, they will operate just at their own discretion. And you have to be very, very careful. We also can't be in a position where we're totally dependent on a country for things like steel, aluminum, and the overall semiconductors and infrastructure stuff that we need. Because if we don't have the ability to provide that for ourselves, it not only can cripple our industry here, what about our national defense?
Can I ask just a quick follow-up on that? In terms of competition with China has become a big theme in the national politics. What is the role of entrepreneurship and national security? How do they relate to each other, if at all?
Well, when I'm talking about becoming an entrepreneur, you typically start in the United States. Most people don't say, I want to be an entrepreneur, I'm going to go ship myself over to Europe or to China. That is not the place where you start typically. And right now, while it may have been a move at one time to go and start plants in China because labor costs were so much less, they're actually being elevated right now. People are going to Vietnam if they want lower costs. There are other areas where you can get lower costs. But people start in the United States. Entrepreneurship will help bring greater and greater boom to the American economy because that's where it starts. If you go and you survey, just survey 1,000 people and ask where are they going to start. I guarantee you over 90% of them are going to say they're going to start right here in America. They're not starting overseas. And I certainly didn't either. The very first place that I opened overseas was actually England. I went to England in 1987. That was the very first, because let's face it, ISO 9000 was a BS standard that was similar to that they got from an American standard. And I thought there needed to be a world standard for quality. And so I started promoting it. Now, I'm going to tell you a story right now, which is a story that I've seldom told. I've never told on the air. I had this idea, and it was just an idea, that we were going to have a world standard. So I decided that I would push everyone in my company that was selling all the products on statistical process control, design of experiments, failure mode effects analysis, all of this, into this ISO 9000 standard. So I had everybody promulgate this for about 4 months, 5 months. I mailed out 80,000 flyers. Do you know, on my one-day seminar, which was only $200, I had only 4 people show up for that seminar. And I had a number of times, I think throughout the period of the next 2 years, I almost went bankrupt 3 times. I had somebody offer me $10 million for my company, and I said no, and about 6 months later, I was about to go under. And then I brought it back up, and then they offered me $20 million, and then I had this idea for ISO 9000. I turned them down, and then I was about to go totally under. I didn't know what I was going to do. And my wife, Diana, I was with her at the time, and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. May have to take a partner on. I have no idea. This is looking hopeless here. And she said, well, I think you should just fold it up there. Just do whatever. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. But 2 weeks later, we got a break, and it took off. And of course, today, we're all over the world. But that is what happens when you get an idea. So I've had many times where I could just say, okay, I'm going to retire. I've had many times to say, well, you know, guy offered me $100 million for one part of my company. I turned that down. But I just keep going. And, you know, I've never regretted anything, and I'm better off than I ever would have been had I sold anything. So that's the way it is in life. And as an entrepreneur, I say, be optimistic. Believe in yourself. And if you do that, you're going to make it.
Mr. Johnson, love your optimism, love your passion. Thank you for being here with us today for this forum. And please join me in thanking him.
Thank you. Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thanks very much.
And we will take a 7-minute break, and we will be back with our final candidate.